Man, you know, this is nuts, but I'm going to send another video message just off the cuff in the morning where I live to Russell Brand because yesterday I did one that some people might think is unhinged to Joe Rogan, but it's not unhinged. I'm justifiably furious. And so the reason I'm doing this morning to you, Mr. Brand, who I admire and I adore, man. Russell, I listen to you all the time. I think you are the most beautiful, contextualization of humanity I've come across in a very long time. And I listen to your stuff on Luminary and everything else, and I find you soothing and I find you incredibly brilliant. But I also find you a little bit of an enigma to me because unfortunately you've got all of the right come froms. You're asking the right questions. You're responding to Joe Rogan and all of the controversy, or as you say, controversy. I can't even say it in the English, tongue, but I love the way you say it. And you're responding to Joe Rogan being in the crossfire of the CNN and COVID madness and whether or not he's a platform, a media platform, and the standards of journalism and who gets to say what. Because of course we know that there is fake media, even though it comes from these sources and all of the algorithms and everything that come, that build all the stuff that you guys are at the front section of. And what I continue to be completely frustrated by is that you're talking about, and very correctly so, folks like you and Rogan and whoever could be in the crossfire of being censored, of being canceled, of being, not to be able to get these voices out there to the public because we know, because of the things that you talk about day in and day out, that there is this incredible convergence between big money interests and, of course, all of the apparatchik that they actually control, the geopolitics of it all, the media control. This stuff has been going on, as you well know, going back over a decade. And I've watched you evolve throughout that time period. And it's incredible. And I love the comedians out there that bring such wit and charm and introspection because you guys know you're getting played and you put such an incredible angle on this, but you continue to miss the biggest point. Rachel Maddow is just a tool in the arsenal of the machine to make sure that people don't know what's going on. How that approach is to, she can talk about Trump and she can talk about his dalliance with complete criminality and everything that exists there, and some others, but that's a safe place for her. She can't go actually after the meritocracy Wall Street Ivy League infrastructure that she's a part of. And I believe that they just paid her $30 million for the thanks of not telling the real story of what took place in 2008 that created the world that we live in. And I've been trying to get this information to you directly through gatekeepers that I know are one step away from you because I've got that information from folks that have both been on your program and also folks that are really well known and established and have incredible credibility. And I'm being censored and ignored by you guys. And I'm not sure why. I kind of feel like this whole thing is high school. Everybody continues to chase the dragon of the 24-hour echo chamber. What's hot? What's now? You've got 4.5 million viewers, 4.8 million viewers, and I'm one of them, and I love you, man. But at the same time, you just keep talking past corruption without access to the real story, which I am providing for you. And I know I look a little bit, unprofessional, and that's because I'm going to just do these when I have to in the moment as it's occurring in my life as I try to just live a normal life, providing for my family. But I've been on a 13-year mission where I connected with the top guys, both in finance, Wall Street, whistleblowers that worked at the biggest financial institutions in the United States that revealed exactly what took place in 2008 to create this world that we live in, including the top brass at the FBI, the DOJ, and the SEC. It was the world's largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up that never ended, and that's why we're in the mix of it now. You and a lot of the folks that you interact with in your own echo chamber, and good for you guys for doing that, and I'm talking about Kyle, and I'm talking about Crystal, and I'm talking about others, of which I've actually participated on and been a part of their programs, that you guys, again, are going after the establishment in unison, and that's fantastic. But I don't know why you guys are not absorbing our work in the con, because we have the answers that you guys are looking for. 2008 wasn't yesterday's news. You know that more than anybody. You bring it up all the time. It's what has created the system that we have. And what everybody has to get to is to understand the Federal Reserve is literally just fueling a Ponzi scheme of massive, massive global consequence now in a whole number of ways. I mean, we've had this thing ongoing since the late 90s because of deregulation, desupervision, and decriminalization that led to bubbles, of course, starting in the 80s with the S&L crisis that then created a pathway because the system created this separation where there was no investigations or accountability to the financial system that could create these hustles. And that's all it is a con. It's a massive confidence scam. And they've targeted working class and they've targeted pensions, and they actually refer to the pensions as stupid money. I just got off a podcast that we produced that's going to hit the airwaves soon, Russell, where you wouldn't believe how these hedge funds approach state pension funds. It's just theft, man. And it's theft every step of the way because none of us are getting to the actual story. Not you, not Joe. Crystal asked the right questions, but she's still not there, even though I've given her the information. I just think that she's running so fast to keep up with the echo chamber that it's hard to focus on this stuff. And I'm trying desperately to elevate these revelations to you. I just have to give you a couple of numbers, Russell. Back in 2012, there were 16 million filed foreclosures. That may have impacted up to 50 million Americans directly. Some of these Americans that we're talking about are fervent listeners to your show that are the younger generation, guys, that people that might be in their 18 to 25-year-old range, you know? And their parents lost their houses, but they lost it because it got set up, and then the court systems literally allowed tens of millions of documentation fraud to illegally foreclose on houses where servicers and foreclosure mills and all of these people in the system, these entities in the system, were just working to cover this thing up feverishly. You know, I talk about this frequently that, you know, all of the worst criminal masterminds in our lifetime, let's think about some of those that, you know, range from, you know, Osama bin Laden to the Gaudis back in when we were kids growing up in the 70s. And then, of course, Pablo Escobar, you know, with his global cocaine run and everything that constituted. None of them, for all of the damage, and we're talking significant damage, Russell, unbelievable damage, still don't hold a candle to what our financial system, and that goes for the City of London, as you well know. And in fact, you probably know better than I do, but it's all part of the same thing. Wall Street and the City of London, through the Federal Reserve, have pulled off this massive smoke and mirrors crime syndicate that basically backs asset prices for the wealthiest amongst us. And that's the source of everything that you're trying to decouple, understand, and everything else. I promise you, Russell, it's all in our work, the con. And you're such a lovely human being. I mean, you really, really, really care about regular people. You have to understand that we start our story on the ground level because of an absolute tragedy. A woman by the name of Addie Polk, a 91-year-old African-American woman who owned her house outright, was being evicted in September of 2008 when the crisis actually was full bore, when the Lehman bankruptcy hit and millions of foreclosures were happening all around the country. She had to take a gun because she was 91 years old. She didn't want to live on the street. She was a well-defined woman. I mean, she was a woman of just great pride and a woman who attended church every day for decades. And she was forced the god-awful ending of putting a gun to her chest and pulling the trigger 5 times. I don't know how the hell she did that. And she survived for 6 months, but she ultimately died and paid the ultimate price because she was set up in this massive crime. That's what this system was doing to people and has done ever since. This while, for example, we continue to concentrate on, if you're Rachel Maddow, Trump, who's doing documentation fraud and the election certification fraud and all of these things that Rachel Maddow has been talking about recently. And this while Rachel Maddow ignores literally tens of millions of documentation fraud that the system allowed to bulldoze people like Addie Polk and many, many, many others, including myself, by the way. And that was a long time ago. And so in addition to that, we've got Tucker Carlson blaming, people that are homeless, that they want to be drug addicts, that they want to, be on the streets, and that the states are incentivizing it, and that, they're building public housing to give away to criminals and drug addicts when they could give it to small business. I mean, Tucker Carlson, as far as I can read, He's done some great stuff on private equity, but as far as this particular story goes and what he's doing now, I mean, he's just an extension of this incredibly vicious right-wing cabal that is funded by the Mercers and all these other guys that are above, Trump and their puppeteering antics and everything else. It's an absolute disaster and mess. And I do want to kind of leave you with this thought too, in terms of how things have been morphing and moving forward. Donald Trump, I mean, this whole big lie, I'm absolutely convinced, evolved from the work that Trump did between Trump Mortgages and Trump University, of which I think you're aware, that he was found guilty of and agreed to a $25 million civil suit because of Trump University predatory mortgages, predatory lending, for that particular student lending. And all of this is part of the same stuff, which as you build up through the pipeline, if you get to the source, you understand that the Federal Reserve through BlackRock, and a lot of you guys are asking the question about BlackRock. And by the way, Larry Flink and BlackRock have been there forever, going back to what was called Maiden Lane. He was actually back in the S&L crisis before he even started BlackRock. But this guy was the cleanup man, the fixer, before they had Aladdin, and then they ended up with, Maiden Lane, which Timothy Geithner and the New York Fed put together with, John Paulson, the Secretary of Treasury at the time during Bush, and then before the transition to Obama, as well as Timothy Geithner and I mentioned Timothy Geithner, Ben Bernanke. And they created this bazooka that led to $29 trillion fueling this criminal enterprise. That was $29 trillion. $29 trillion. I can't get that number out of my mind, and I want the world to know it, and I want you to help me tell them, Russell, because this is what the whole story is. We know that there's 1,000 billion and a trillion. The GDP of the United States is roughly 25 trillion, 27 trillion. The 2008 collapse created $41.6 trillion hit to the economy. And the bad guys got away with it. The guys that are CEOs that loot their companies, that ultimately have a backstop, it's all fiction, man. It's all smoke and mirrors. And the only way you can understand it is if you understand all of the elements that go into it. Who am I? I'm just a regular American citizen that actually did the work with my colleagues, of course, that the United States government, with all of its agencies that work to the tune of $75 billion a year, that includes the FBI, that includes the DOJ, that includes the SEC, that includes AGs around the country, couldn't put this together. We, as citizens, had to go put it together because none of it made sense until it did. Now it makes complete sense. When you see it, because of how incredibly gifted you are, intuitive, just, you're an amazing human being, and I love you, man. But I don't know why your team is censoring me in this truth. It was a global devastation. It hit 300 million people around the globe, and it has never stopped. And what are we going to do? What questions are we going to ask? Are we going to run around in circles when there's massive calamity, which appears to be on the horizon? But I'm not sure if there ever will be a calamity if nobody knows how they're doing it, how the hedge funds, the private equity funds, the titans of Wall Street, and they're complicit actors in our political system. And again, our being the allies. Could you imagine Winston Churchill and Roosevelt thinking this would be the outcome of the victory against the Nazis, and everything that came after, during the Cold War? We've just created a criminal racket. It's a criminal racket undergirded and executed by the smartest people in our system, people that come out of Ivy Leagues, that have professional degrees. They're all bought, man, and you know that. But there's a method to the madness, and it's called control fraud. Russell, I beg you, please check out our stuff. Please have your people give me a call. Let's try to get this information out there to the world, because you're doing it, and this isn't high school, man. We're trying to get to the truth. You and your tribe, man. The cool freaking comedians are not journalists, man. I am. I'm a producer and investigative journalist that spent 13 years with incredible resources to crisscross this country at least 12 times to get the truth, man. And that's not what the New York Times did. That's not what the Washington Post did. That's not what the Chicago Tribune did. That's not what the Miami Herald did, or the Houston Chronicle, or the LA Times, or anybody else, even though they all did bits and pieces of it. But in the aftermath, another thing you should be aware of is that hedge funds bought newspapers up around the country. So the big eureka is that And the reason this story was never told completely so that we don't understand the world we actually live in is because hedge funds purchase newspapers all over the country. Look it up, make some calls, call me, I'll lead you in the right direction. And they killed investigations. And the same goes with the DOJ, and same goes with the FBI. And in the con, we've got the top guys telling us as much and exactly what they got away with. Russell, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You and I are from the same generation. I get a vibe of who you are, man. I know you've been around the block. You've seen so much, and you've come out the other side as one of the most daring, beautiful, uplifting human beings that exist. And thank God you exist. And all the best to you and all the success. But I'm begging you, please don't sit on this story. Please don't censor us. Just look at what we're doing. Take a step back and look, and call me. Your contact people have my number. Please. I think the world actually depends on it. We've been a downward death spiral ever since. This is the only way we can save democracy, not for the people selling us out. Thanks, Russell.